Hi, this is Coach Ray back for another learning snack. And these are just bite sized training solutions to address some of the most frequently asked questions that I have been receiving from my amazing coaching, training, and consulting clients amidst this COVID-19 stay at home order. And so, this training specifically, I decided to break it up into like maybe three. I'm thinking we're going to be somewhere between 3 to 4 videos to address this specific topic, downsizing and layoffs. Now, let me just start with a disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an HR professional. And so, what I am sharing is information only, right? Educational for educational purposes as well. I'm not an attorney, and nor do I play one on TV. So, I would suggest is that you seek legal counsel just to confirm, because every state is different, every municipality, there's nuances. So we want to make sure that you understand what's required when it comes to downsizing and layoffs for your not only industry, but also within your state. So I want to talk about this because amidst COVID-19, what we know is that this time is unprecedented. We know that. I think right now the number for layoffs or people filing for unemployment, as of this video, we are somewhere around, I want to say, a little over 6 million people who have filed for unemployment, and we sadly know a lot of individuals will not be returning, right? And a lot of companies are doing their best to keep their people. They're doing their best to make sure that they don't have to lay off people. But sadly, in order to stay in business, many leaders are going to make hard decisions. So in midst of that, before we even go there, and in future videos, we'll talk a little bit more about, things to look for, things to consider when you're downsizing and laying off. But I also want to talk first and foremost, before we even get there, it's for you to consider alternatives. Consider alternatives. So just so you know, I'm going to be looking down because I took copious notes, and I want to make sure that I'm covering everything. And, what I will say is that, I've had the great fortune of starting 5 companies. I currently run 2 companies, and I know what it's like to sit in the seat of a leader. I know what it's like to have a hard conversation and feel, just the weight and the burden of someone's family on your shoulder. So first and foremost, I want to commend you if you're a leader. I know you're not making the decision lightly. I know that it's a difficult time. And I also want you to know that, I'm also giving you permission to give yourself grace. This is not who you are. You are stepping into the role as the leader because you are fiscally responsible for keeping your doors open and making sure that your company stays alive during this difficult time. But before we cut people off, before we cut them and we send them off and reintroduce them back into the marketplace, I would suggest that you look at some alternatives. So I'm going to give you some suggestions. The first one is a freeze on hiring, promotions, and pay raises. So let's start with a freeze on hiring, promotion, or pay raise. Number two, a freeze on filling positions. So let's say that you had some team members that have voluntarily left, right? And you have job openings. This COVID-19 has taken a lot of people by surprise, right? Myself included. And so let's say that you had these job openings and you're like, okay, I'm in the process of filling them. Instead of you laying people off, it probably will make sense for you to just not fill these positions at the time being. And that's going to support you in keeping as many of your team members as possible. Number three, cutting other costs. Now, it's crazy because when I was going through the recession, I was coaching a lot of people during that time. And at that time, I was actually working for a coaching company. And I'll never forget that I would say over an 18-month period, we ended up losing like half the staff, right? And one day we came into the cafeteria, and keep in mind, this was a great company. It was listed on the best places to work. The CEO was phenomenal. We had this family environment. We loved each other. We loved what we did to serve our clients. And yet the recession was one of the toughest times I've ever experienced working at this company. And I remember going in the cafeteria, and what we all noticed is that, you know, prior to this day, we normally would have just amazing organic tea, right? We would do our coaching calls, we would go get a delicious cup of chai latte or whatever, right? We had all these different, somewhere between 20 to 30 different types of tea. And this day I go in, and guess what we had? Lipton. Lipton, regular and decaffeinated. That's what we had. And you would have thought that someone had murdered someone because people went livid. They were like, I cannot believe Lipton. And I remember we had our staff meeting, and the CFO at the time, he addressed it and he said, well, what we recognize is that when we started looking at our expenses, that we were spending somewhere around $200,000 a year on tea. So we decided, instead of letting people go, that we would cut that line item so that we can keep more people working. Well, talk about perspective. We're like, oh, no problem, no problem. So what did we do? We all start bringing in tea, our favorite teas, organic teas. And it's like, you don't have to worry about the Lipton. Well, we got this, right? So cutting other costs. I'm sure that if you take inventory, you have a lot of expenses, a lot of things that you might be paying for that just doesn't even make sense. You're not using it, whether it's subscriptions or memberships or recurring costs. I would say let's do an inventory and let's reduce some of those costs. So that's one option. Also, pay cuts. Now, this one is really hard to go to your team and say, hey, we're asking you to take a reduction in pay. Um, it's difficult, but what I will say is that many people will do it as opposed to not having pay at all. What I would strongly suggest and encourage you to do is that if you are going to ask your team to take a pay cut, that you share with them when they can expect their pay to return back to normal. So here's the other thing. With COVID-19, we know we have the CARE Act, right? So the government passed this law, and one of the things that is part of it is really a component to help the small business owner. So if you have a company that has 500 employees or less, you can actually apply for a small business loan. And that small business loan has a payroll protection component to it. It's really designed for you to keep your team. And what's going to happen is the SBA will come in, they will give you a low interest loan. And along with that low interest loan, that if in fact you lay people off and or you reduce people's salaries, if you bring their salaries back to norm, if you bring those people back by June of 2020, then that loan becomes a forgivable grant. Now, keep in mind, there's other nuances to it. So I would say seek out counsel. Again, legal professionals, the trusted banker, all of these individuals to get clarity around your specific situation. But here's my thought. If you're a small business owner and you have 500 or less employees, it doesn't make sense for you not to apply for this, especially if you can have that loan forgiven. It's like free money. So come on, you keep your people. But if you need to do a pay cut, I again recommend that you share with them because their life is obviously impacted by this. A lot of people sadly are living paycheck to paycheck. So being able to say, "Hey, we're going to ask that you take a reduction in your pay, and our hope is that we can restore it by," and give them a timeline. Now, granted, we don't know how long this COVID-19 is happening, but the more you can let people know, at the end of the day, people understand what we're all going through. We're all going through this. And so that's one alternative. Asking your employees to take time off or reduce their hours. So that's another option. We assume that all employees need the money. There are some people who will come work for us and maybe they have a spouse who, makes a lot of money. Maybe they have a lot of savings. I remember there was one company when I was writing my book, The Corporate Exodus, um, how top companies attract and keep and retain their employees and next generation of leaders. And I'll never forget, excuse me, my eye is itchy. I never forget this one company that I was researching and interviewing. And what they ended up doing is that people who had the ability to take time off, it's like when they did the pay cut, a lot of people was like, hey, you know what? I can take a deep pay, you know, I'll take the pay cut, keep that person's salary intact, right? They came together as a team and said, hey, I'll take time off. I have all of these accumulation of sick days or vacation days. I'll take those off, or I can take it off unpaid. A lot of people have the capacity to do that. So, reaching out to your team and asking them if they're able to take time off or reduce their hours in order to get through this challenging time. I also think it's important at this time that we reduce overtime, right? Authorize overtime. So, if we're cutting costs, then it might be difficult, especially if you find that you're impacted, but, reducing overtime is one way. Um, and then here's another one, providing voluntary termination incentives to allow the person to decide whether to quit in exchange for a package or a benefit, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, some people, they realize they might be at the end of this chapter and they're okay with leaving. How about we provide them a package, right? It's like if you're willing to leave, especially if you have people, and we see this, people might be close to retirement and they're like, you know what, I was getting out of here in a couple of years. Give me a package. I'm out of here. Keep these other youngins and let me go. And so I think, as you are deciding on whether to downsize or lay off, you want to consider the alternatives, right? Um, and let's start there. And in future training, we're going to talk about after you have considered the alternatives, what is the process to actually deciding who stays, who goes, and really what to look for when you're starting to lay people off. So I know this is a tough topic. I know we're all trying to get through this. I would say be encouraged. This too shall pass. We will all come out of this on the other side. And just know that, we're here to serve you. We're here to help you. If you need our expertise, please, by all means, reach out to us. We want to help. And, I honor you as we all go through this, challenging time. So this is Coach Ray, as always, saying live boldly, authentically, and courageously. Bye.